Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, then welcome to my channel. I am starting a new series called Quilting for Beginners, and this is the first video in that series. In this video, I'm going to show you some notions and tools that every new quilter should have in his or her arsenal. So let's get started. First off, here is a cutting mat. It is a self-healing cutting mat, and this one is 24 by 36 inches. You don't need one specifically this size, but having one this size does come in handy, so I do suggest getting this one or maybe a bigger one if you have the space. Along with your cutting mat, I suggest a few quilting rulers in your stash as well. This is a 2.5 inch squared quilting ruler. If you are using mini charms, this is good to use to square up those mini charms, or if you want to cut your own mini charms, this is good for that as well. Also, this is a 6.5 inch squared quilting ruler. You can use this to cut 3-inch squares, 4-inch squares, 5-inch squares, but I also suggest getting a dedicated 5-inch square ruler. So if you're using charm packs, you can use your 5-inch square ruler to square up those blocks in the charm pack if needed. And this is a 6.5 by 24 inch ruler. I suggest this one or the 8.5 by 24 inch by OmniGrid. This comes in handy when you are cutting long pieces of fabric that come off of the bolt. Along with your cutting mat and your rulers, you will need a rotary cutter. This rotary cutter takes a 28mm blade, but I suggest buying a rotary cutter that takes a 45mm blade, which is much bigger than this one and is good for beginners to start with. This is a nice to have, but not really necessary. These are clear non-slip adhesive rings that you could place on the back of your quilting ruler, and it helps to make sure that your ruler doesn't move or slide when it's on your fabric and you're trying to cut out your blocks. Another important tool to have is definitely an iron when you need to iron out your fabric, or you need to iron open your seams or iron your seams to one side. This is a very small iron. This is basically all I need because I only work with mini quilt projects and not really large quilt projects, and also this silicone iron mat where I can place the hot iron on. If you're working on large quilting projects, you'll probably need a bigger iron, also a big ironing board. For me, I just have a little small personal ironing mat, and that's good for me. Here is a tool that I've actually fell in love with and use it much more than actually using an iron, and this one is called a seam roller, and I will show you exactly how to use it. You can use it to press your seams open or use it to press your fabric to the darker side. Here's a very, very small half square triangle. So what you want to do is you'll open up your block and you would finger press it first. Then you would take your seam roller and you would press down on it and press down really hard, and you would just roll over that a few times. Then you can press it on the back, and now you've pressed open your block and pressed your seam. Here is a magnetic pin cushion. This is great, so if you have your pins all over the place and you need to collect them quickly, just turn it over like this and it automatically just picks them up for you. Along with that is these flat head pins, which I love dearly. flathead pens, they have a very thin shaft and a very pointy end. And they're good for piecing your blocks together. Because the shaft is so thin, it doesn't distort your fabric and move it out of place that much. And it helps when you're doing that 1/4 inch seam. However, on the other side, if you are piecing together or sewing together a quilt sandwich, I suggest using these basting pins. The good thing about a basting pin is it has this very curved bottom. Hold on. There we go. Have this curved bottom here. And how you use it is it just, sorry, let me focus there again. Come on. Let's see. There we go. It has this curved bottom, so you just go down into your quilt sandwich, come back up, and then close up the pin. And this works really well not to distort your sandwich when you're bringing it under the sewing machine. And if you don't know what I mean by a quilt sandwich, here's an example of a quilt sandwich. Here's a project that I am working on. A quilt sandwich is you have a top piece of fabric, a bottom piece of fabric, and in the middle you have your batting. Another good tool for beginners, especially when working with 1/4 inch seams, is this quilter's quarter or quilting quarter. And how you use it is you would place this. So I have 2 pieces of fabric here. These are each 5-inch blocks. And I want to make half square triangles with them. So I will put this on a diagonal. And while on the diagonal, you know, it has these slits in the middle. So I would draw my lines here. And then between the outside and between the inside and the outside on either end is a 1/4 inch. So I would draw a line here, and then I would draw a line here. And once I do that, I have 3 lines. I have the middle line, and then I have my 2 outside lines. So I would take this to my sewing machine, and I would stitch along the outside lines. And once I'm done stitching that, I would then take my ruler, line it up on that middle line, take my rotary cutter, and then cut my block. And then what I would have when it's done is this half square triangle. And a half square triangle is basically a square with 2 different triangular patterns. So this quilter's quarter comes in handy to help you to draw out your 1/4 inch on each side and draw that middle line when you want to make half square triangles. I want to encourage you to develop a particular habit when using a rotary cutter. When you are about to cut your block, you will pick up your rotary cutter, you will remove the guard from the rotary cutter, you will slice your block, but before you pick up that rotary cutter, you want to make sure to slide the guard back over the rotary cutter before you place it down. In this way, if you happen to brush your hand against it for some reason, you won't slice yourself with the rotary cutter. This is a great habit to have, great habit to start in order to make sure there are no mistakes and you don't cut yourself when you are using the rotary cutter. This tool is called That Purple Thing, and it has many different uses. Here on the tip of it, if I can get it to focus, here on the tip of it is a 1/4 inch square, so you can use it to measure out your 1/4 inch. Also, there is the slit here that you could draw elastic through and then tie it. And then if you're making a waistband, you just use this to just pull it through all the way to the end. Also has this pointy end as a stiletto. Sorry, there we go. Has this pointy end right here as a stiletto, which helps you to guide and hold your fabric through the sewing machine up into the needle instead of putting your finger up close to the needle. Also, you can use this if you're working on your quilt sandwich and you need to turn your project right side out, then you would take this to poke out. You would take the end of this to poke out those corners. And those are just some of the few uses of this. There are many other uses that you can find to use with that purple thing. If you plan to hand bind your quilt, I suggest getting some quilting needles. Get that to focus. Sorry. Some quilting needles. And these are great needles, and they're by Dritz. And on the back, they even show you the sizes of each of the needles. Along with your quilting needles, if you are planning to do machine quilting, then universal needles will be great when you're doing patchwork, and quilting needles will be great if you're doing free motion quilting or if you're putting your quilt sandwich under the sewing machine. Fabric pins are also one of the tools you need in your arsenal, especially as a beginner when you're needing to mark that 1/4 inch seam. You can use just a fabric pencil or you can use a fabric pin. This is a friction fabric pin. When using any of these tools, you need to make sure to test it on your fabric first to make sure that they actually will come out. So whichever type of marking tool you use, whether it's a pen, a pencil, or chalk, you need to do a test mark and make sure that it will actually come out the way that it says on the instructions. When you are adding binding to your quilt, you will definitely need some clips or wonder clips. These help keep that binding in place while you're trying to sew your binding onto your quilt project. And basically how you use this is, here is a little small mini quilt project that I am working on. You would just roll your binding onto the back and then clip that into place, and you'll do that all the way around. And you could just hand sew that binding to the back of your quilt project. But if you plan to machine sew your binding, here's a little tip for you. So you would roll your binding on the back. When you roll your binding on the back, you want to make sure that your binding is covering up your stitch line. Let me bring that a little closer. Make sure it's covering up this stitch line. So when you roll it on the back, you want to make sure that the flat portion of the clip is on the back of the project. So you would roll that, cover up that stitching line, and then clip. You would do that all the way around. And then when you bring it to your machine, you will stitch in the ditch so that it catches, stitch in the ditch so that it catches the binding on the back. And so you don't see the stitching on the front, but you will see the stitching on the back. I like to hand sew the binding to my project so that it looks similar on the back and the front and not see any stitching. But if you want to machine sew, that's a quick tip on how to do that. Lastly, every quilter needs a good pair of snips, and a good pair of sewing shears. These sewing shears are Ginger. They are much more expensive than Fiskars or any other brand, but these are absolutely my favorite. I have tried Fiskars throughout the years. For many years, I've decided to go for the Ginger, and I absolutely love these the best. But they are expensive. If you don't want to spend $50 on a pair of shears, then really you can check out any of Fiskars or any other brand. And also snips, these are good for trimming your threads and getting those out of the way. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. I hope you go out and get some of these tools. You don't really need them right away, but these are some of the things to think about or put on your wish list. So please like this. Please give a thumbs up for this video if you like it. Also, please subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Also, please share it via social media. And until next time, happy sewing.